I am putting my screen on share. Give me a thumbs up when you can see it. Okay, awesome. So, thank you everyone for joining. Super excited to host Jodi today. And it is actually the first time that Jodi is doing a session virtually for the community group in Pakistan. Super excited, and it's been long in the making. I couldn't wait for the day to come around. And the topic that Jodi would be talking about today is the common mistake for newcomers, and then how to find your way around it. So the agenda again is pretty simple. We are doing this one session with Jodi today. Just a quick overview of the group. Um, this is the Salesforce Women in Tech Islamabad group, and we are the two co-leaders. And Sana actually joined me last month as the co-leader. So this is her first event after being a co-leader officially. So a little cheers for Sana for stepping up and volunteering to manage this group with me. Sana, would you like to add something?
Thank you so much. I think looking forward to like a lot of events like this, and thank you, Jody, for being here for it with us.
It is my honor, and I realize it's late where you are. So thank you for having me, and I want to give a huge shout out to everybody for staying up late to join today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone again for joining us at um, night. Just a quick overview of the impact so far. So we just started being active in 2023, but since then, the last year, we have already organized around 20 plus events so far. We had new speakers and old speakers from Pakistan, from abroad, everywhere. And then the best part is that we have been able to have around 500 attendees overall to all of these events, which was a massive impact for all of us here. And we have seen people getting hired, creating their own communities, and the impact has been really heartwarming so far. And I will go ahead and do a very quick introduction for Jody as well, and I'll leave it to Jody to add if I miss anything. But I'm pretty sure everybody has seen Jody all over LinkedIn, and I love every time you pop up on my timeline because you're so appreciative, motivating towards everybody, sharing great insights. And most of the time, there are things that I've never even, thought of. So, very good perspective on different things, which definitely shows that Jody comes in with almost 2 decades of Salesforce experience. Jody is the author for the very infamous book, Rocking Your Role as a Salesforce Admin. And that as well has been all over LinkedIn. So, that really speaks to what kind of value that book provides. And again, I think Jody, you are like the walking, talking version of the book on LinkedIn, and I enjoy all the insights that come from you. So with that, stop sharing my screen. So feel free to share your screen, Jody, and add in anything that I missed out on.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that was a very lovely introduction. And as you said, just a little bit of background so everybody knows. My claim to fame is I've been doing Salesforce for a living for over 2 decades. I think 22 years, the last time I counted. I actually attended the very first Dreamforce to put that in perspective. And I tell a story sometimes that one of my big objectives at that Dreamforce event was I wanted to meet the Salesforce product manager because I needed to explain how desperately we needed an or statement in our reports. Because back in 2002, whenever that was, if you wanted to report on two different things in Salesforce, you had to report on this or that in two different reports. And so I always like to share that to say, Salesforce seems like it's this big behemoth company, but it also had humble beginnings, just like, folks starting out in their Salesforce journey. It didn't get where it was overnight. It was small incremental improvements, right? A release at a time. that made it what it was today. So I think that's always an important way to ground the conversation, especially for newcomers that might feel like you're drinking from a fire hose sometimes, right? There's so much to learn, but you don't have to learn it all at once, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I have had the opportunity to work with some of the best Salesforce teams in the business. I've hired and managed dozens of Salesforce admins, and I know that it's a big jump to start this career. There's a lot to learn. So today I'm going to give you just a few tips and tricks and kind of ways to think about some things that I hope will be helpful for you. I am an open book, literally and figuratively, but I would love this to be an interactive conversation, right? This is time for you. If you have questions, you're welcome to ask. You can interrupt if there's something you want to drill into. I'm really bad at tracking the chat. So if our fearless leaders might, let me know if there's something you want me to address. Otherwise, I'm going to intentionally leave some time at the end, and I'm more than happy to take any questions. I want to make sure that if there's something on your mind that we get that addressed. So with that, let me share my screen here. Let's see. Let me move this guy over. Share this screen. All right, let's get started. All right. One of my most critical pieces of advice that I give everybody is you've got to spend time with the business peeps. When you start a new job, and this is true whether you are working as part of the business team, whether you are a consultant that has a new client, or whether sometimes you're even part of the technical team, first and foremost, at the end of the day, you have to understand the use case for Salesforce. And in some instances, you're going to work with organizations that are going to provide you that opportunity. They might even suggest that you go sit with business users before you actually dig in and start doing work on Salesforce. In some organizations, you won't. So I'm giving you this tip because I want you to advocate for yourself if you don't have that opportunity. And I want you to make sure that if you aren't getting a chance to look, sit side by side with business, sit in some of their meetings, look at their business processes, that I'm giving you permission to ask your manager to help you facilitate that, because it's really important. And at the end of the day, what we're doing on Salesforce isn't just technology. We're facilitating business process, and we have to understand how the business process works. That's how we're able to support it, and that's how we're able to find opportunities to improve the process with our knowledge of the platform that we support. So first and foremost, you got to spend time with the business peeps. All right. Second thing is you've got to know the org, and it can be sometimes intimidating when you take a new role and you realize all the things that are happening inside the platform. So a couple pieces of advice. Number one, ask what you should prioritize, right? There's a lot in there. And I literally like to ask the question of a manager, what are the things that I should focus on first? What are the areas? What are the modules? What are the objects? Whatever it is, depending on your role, right? You don't need to guess. Ask your manager that question, what you should prioritize. And I'm gonna just so nobody's surprised, odds are good wherever you go, there's not going to be the kind of documentation that you wish you had. Even on our best attempts to do it over the years, more often than not, the system gets ahead of the documentation. So even in those organizations that are really good at it, there's going to be pieces that are missing. So letting everybody know right now, you can ask for it, but don't be surprised when it's not there. But one way that you can add value right from the get-go is, as you are prioritizing a piece of the org to learn or go deep on or understand on, use that as an opportunity to do the documentation, right? So not only are you learning something, but right from the get-go, you can potentially add some value to your team by, saying something along the lines of, I realized there wasn't any documentation in terms of how this actual process works. So based on what I've learned over the last couple weeks, I took a stab at putting something together. And by the way, it's okay if it's not right, if it's okay if it's not perfect. Odds are it's going to be better than what they have. And it's going to give you an opportunity to kind of confirm your understanding of what you've picked up from the org so far. My third piece of advice as it pertains to knowing the org is schedule a teach back as soon as you can. And so if you're not familiar with that term, a teach back is essentially when you are going to sit with your manager, your team, your business partners, whoever makes the most sense, and you're going to walk them through some piece of the org as you understand it. And it's going to feel weird and awkward, and you're not going to want to do this, but trust me, this is the fastest way for you to learn the org. It's the fastest way for you to get comfortable talking about the business terms that your organization or your client use, right? Every company has different vernacular. They might call their customers or clients, or students if you're supporting an academic org, patients, perhaps, whatever it is. These might be words that aren't just familiar. They're not something that you've done before. So it's going to feel weird and awkward, but I promise you, it's going to help you learn the org faster. And everybody always says teaching is the fastest way to learn, and this is just one little piece of the pie. And I promise your manager will be impressed if you take the initiative, and you can even set it up and say, hey, it's likely not going to be perfect, but I'd love an opportunity to walk back and present my understanding of, whatever part of the functionality makes sense. And it will give an opportunity for you to give me some feedback if there's some areas that we need to go deeper on. Okay. And then the fourth bullet on here, you got to learn the rules of engagement. So every org runs a little bit differently. Every admin role works a little bit differently. Every consulting role works a little bit differently in terms of what specifically you can do. There might be certain roles where you are part of the business unit, and part of your role is to merge data, right? That's you would be expected to be in production helping do some data cleanup. In other roles, you might be part of the technical team, which never touches data because it's owned by the business team, right? And everything in between. So those are just examples of how different companies work different ways. I've worked in organizations where it is expected that things like list views and reports are done directly in production at the request of the business. You might be part of the sales team. You might support a revenue leader. That revenue leader needs a new report. You go, you build that out. That's part of your role. There's other organizations that have a lot of rigor and a completely different governance process, even for those types of things. So there's not a right or wrong. It's simply to say all organizations run their Salesforce teams very different. And so you need to make sure that for your organization, wherever you are working, that you know what those rules are. What am I allowed to do? What's the process for moving things? Do I have my own sandbox? Where do I work, et cetera? And it's okay to ask that question. It's okay if you're, doing something and you're not sure where you should do it, or if it's okay to do it, err on the side of asking, because really organizations work very differently. So there's no way that you would know some of those things going in unless you were to ask. All right. This is one of my favorite ones, I like to say. Withhold judgment, but keep a list of quick hits. So when you first go into an organization for the first time and you crack open that Salesforce, I promise you, you're going to see things that all of a sudden you start thinking about, wow, we could do that differently. Wow, they didn't, they didn't use any conditional visibility on their page layouts. Boy, like we should work on that. Like all these things that you've learned are going to be going through your mind, and you're going to have all these ideas, and you're going to be scratching your head a little bit about why they didn't do it a certain way. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of times they're just busy, or that wasn't a priority, or it wasn't a priority yet. So I always like to say, we always want to withhold judgment, because I promise the things that jump out at you in the early days of your org, you're going to find very different priorities and needs as you start working inside the organization. So I always just say, withhold judgment, right? We don't exactly know why things work the way they do. There's probably a good reason. Also, a lot of orgs have been around now for 10 to 20 years even. So a lot of orgs were built with a very different set of tools than we have today. But at the same time, I still also want to say, keep a list of quick hits. As you see some of these things, it might be things that you see as you have an opportunity to look in the setup menu. It might be ideas that you get as you're doing those side by sides with your end users, whatever those are. So keep a list of quick hits. So at some point, as you start getting familiar, as your boss starts coming to you and saying, hey, what are your thoughts? Do you see any opportunities for improvement? You've got that list, but we sometimes want to kind of keep that in our hip pocket until which time we've had a sense to get oriented in the org. All right. If you've spent any time with me online, I know this one is going to be familiar to all of you. No matter what your actual title is, every single Salesforce professional must often wear that hat of the business analyst, right? This is, the number one rule, I think, of Salesforce is we always have to figure out the why behind the ask. What problem are we solving for? How big is that problem? Why is it a problem? What's the outcome that's desired? What's the end game? All of those things before we put our hands on keyboards for even the most routine ask. And so if you are somebody who is in a role that's facing where you're actually working directly with stakeholders, with folks that are making those asks of you, then we got to get you comfortable asking those questions directly to those people. If you are somebody that is in what I call a more of the back of the house role, where maybe you aren't working directly with stakeholders, you still wear that business analyst hat. It just means when you're getting that request, maybe from a business analyst, if you've got a team that works like that, it's still okay and important. I would even, contend it's your not just your right, but your responsibility to make sure that you understand the context behind it. What are we doing? Why? Where does this fit into a larger business problem? What exactly are we solving for? And even if it's your boss, right? This isn't about being insubordinate. This is about saying it would help me to be able to execute this story better if I had some business context as to exactly what we're solving for. Right. And, more often than not, they'll have that, but sometimes they're going to, realize that, hey, those are good questions. So let me go back and ask. But there's a reason that I always say, when you are a Salesforce professional, a consultant, regardless of whether it's an admin role, which I say is consultative in nature, or an external consultant, we've got to get really comfortable that our consultants, or excuse me, that our stakeholders can't always get what they want. But if we do our job right, they'll always get what they need, right? That's the value add that we bring, is taking those asks and turning them into whatever the right solution is that's going to solve that problem. And this is the reason that I say asking questions is a superpower. And I'm glad I put this note here, because I would have forgotten to tell you, I do have a cheat sheet that's available. It's out on sfadminbook.com. And there's just a quick cheat sheet with 20 of my must ask questions if anybody wants to have that, with some essentially quick quick ideas for how to get to the why behind the ask, right? Because we don't want to just keep saying why, even though that's really ultimately what we're going for. But we want to be able to say things like, hey, what's the impetus behind this ask? Might I ask what's the catalyst behind this request? Can you give me some additional information about what it is that we're trying to accomplish? All of those are just different ways of getting folks to open up and give you some information. All right. Listen, but not too literally. So our job is to ask. Our job is also to listen and use some discretion when we're hearing certain words. And so the reason that I say this is a lot of times in Salesforce world, we're going to hear things from our stakeholders that are going to sound like Salesforce functionality. They're going to say something like, I need to set up an alert, or I need a way to track approvals, or I need a place to put notes. And especially, I think when we're new, our brain goes ding, ding, ding. I know how to do approvals, or ding, 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 notes. I know about that notes related list, right? And what you find often, again, when we apply our questions and we start asking, hey, when you say you need a way to track approvals, what does that mean to you? What exactly does the approval need to include? What are you looking at in order to determine if you're going to approve it? Many times what we find out is they're expressing a business problem that may or may not warrant the exact solution that sounds like this, right? So an example is, while Salesforce has a very robust approval process, in some instances, they just want a way to check a box to indicate they've looked at something. And setting up an entire approval process might actually be more trouble than it's worth, or not necessarily be the easiest way to accommodate what they mean by that. Leads is another good example. I need a place to put my leads. We automatically go, oh, I better go turn on the leads tab, right? And in some cases, that's going to be the right solution. But in some cases, when you say, what do you mean by leads? What are you trying to accomplish? It turns out that they're really just looking for a segment of existing opportunities that they call their leads, and they maybe just need a new report or something like that. So the point is, just want to make sure that we're always being very cognizant that there are words that sound like features, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily the solution. We still always want to put on that BA hat and ask all the questions we can to make sure we really understand what it is they're solving for. This is related, right? So defining terms and asking for examples. So just like we're going to hear things that are going to sound like Salesforce features, we're also going to hear things like, hey, can you help with a training plan? Sana, can you help us develop a communication plan? We need to see the testing plan, right? These are just a few examples. I promise you, if you ask 10 different stakeholders what they expect when the word communication plan or training plan or testing plan, you're going to get 10 different answers. And so this is another really important piece of advice that will save you a lot of hours over the course of your career, is to just really get comfortable. My favorite question is, what does that mean to you? So when you say communication plan, what does that mean to you? Right? Doesn't mean I don't know what a communication plan is, because I understand sometimes when we don't want to ask those kind of questions because we don't want there to be an appearance that we don't know. So my favorite, just if you do nothing else, write down right now in a little post-it note and stick it on the side of your desk. What does that mean to you? So when you say testing plan, what does that mean to you? Right? And as they start describing it, as what level of detail are you expecting? And then the magic part, if you can, is to ask for an example. Do you have something you've used in the past that I might reference so I can ensure we're on the same page? Do you have a training plan that you've used for a prior rollout that I can reference to or ensure we're on the same page? And the reason this is so important, I'm going to hammer this one home for a few minutes, is a couple things can happen if we aren't aligned. One is, you can think something's a lot bigger than it is, right? I've seen this happen a lot, where somebody said, oh, somebody wants a training plan, or, somebody's looking for the project plan. And, the next thing you know, I'm like, where's so-and-so? I haven't, where have they been doing the last couple of days? And they finally emerge and they say, I've been working on the project plan. And they roll out this thing that's, pages and pages, pages long. And it turned out, what that particular request was a couple bullets, right? A couple bullets, four bullets. So we kind of have a sense of what we're doing. So we don't want to do that, because your time is incredibly valuable, and we want to make sure you're not spending it on things that you don't need to be spending it on. And then the flip side that I've seen is somebody has the assumption that we only need 4 bullet points, right? And bring that over to the stakeholder who goes, wait a minute, where's my project plan? And there's not a right or wrong definition for any of these things. Just like we have to make sure that our solutions are aligned, we want to make sure that these other things that are part of our roles and responsibility, that we're always just really clear on exactly what the expectation is, making sure we're on the same page. And the best way to do that, again, questions are a superpower, right? So what does that mean to you? I just want to remind everybody, just jot that down. I promise it'll save you a lot of headache over the course of your career. All right, here's another one. We want to aim for right, not fast. And, Salesforce is a mission critical system in most companies. And the work that we do down to the small detail matters. And things take time. And guess what? Your manager knows things that take time. So, one of the things that I sometimes see with new hires is they're feeling like, somebody asked me to do this, I got to get it done. And the truth of the matter is, and this is true whether you're new in Salesforce or you've been around for a while, right? There's more often than not, there's a lot of different ways to do something. So we always want to take a moment and consider what are the options, what would be the pros and cons of different ways to do this. What are the implications if I make this change, right? So that's, a little bit of the upfront thinking that we want to do. And then always we want to make sure that we're testing our work. So even if it's something as simple as we're building a report for somebody, or we're doing a data load, before we let somebody know that, hey, here it is, it's done, we want to make sure that we've run through the scenarios, we've looked at that report. If it's a data load, we've then actually done some reporting afterwards to make sure the data looks like it's expected, right? So whatever kind of the ask is, more often than not, there's going to be multiple steps, both before we execute on it, during the execution, and after the execution. And that's part of the process. And it's important in the Salesforce world to just know that, it's not about fast, it's about right. Work in a sandbox. This one is probably self-explanatory. We said early on, we have to make sure that you understand the rules in your org, in your company. If you're working as a consultant, you might even have different rules for different clients. So you just need to make sure that you know that. And by the way, if you don't have your own sandbox, ask if you can have one, even if it's simply for a way to try things out, so you can have some confidence with some different things, and it's a way for you to get to know your org a little bit better. All right, consider the options. I just hit on this one a little bit, right? Anytime that we're developing in Salesforce, there's lots of different ways to do things. So generally speaking, we want to be thinking about what's the path of least resistance, but we also want to be thinking about what's most scalable, what's going to give us the most optionality going forward. And then here's the secret sauce on this one. When we are considering different options, we want to document the pros and cons of each that you considered. And I will tell you why. I cannot tell you how many times in the course of my career we went through some kind of a discussion, a debate about, should we do it this way or that way, right? Is this fields we should add to the object, or does it really belong to a related object? Is this automation that we should do this way or that way? Whatever it is, you can imagine there's always different ways to accomplish things on the platform. And in lieu of having that documentation, What happens is about 6 to 12 months later, something comes up and we go, why did we do it this way? What would have happened if we did? And we don't remember. So we spend all these hours going back through the same conversation. Sometimes we come to a decision because there's a blocker. There's actually a system limitation. Okay, the reason we decided to go with Plan B instead of Plan A is, whatever it was. We hit an object limit, perhaps, or whatever those things are. There was some kind of glitch in the Salesforce functionality that just made it kludgy. So we did it this way instead. Those things change over time. So they're not always easy to remember kind of what the decision was. So if nothing else, as you're doing things, and also this is a way that was going to give you a lot of value to your manager who's going to understand that the way you think is we just, want to recognize for most things that we're doing that there's usually more than one way. There's not, very rarely is there a right way. There's just different ways. And so being able to document kind of pros, cons, and ultimately what led you down a different path will serve you well. Considering the consequences. This is another one. And I know this one sometimes gets people, scared of like, well, I don't want to do anything. Like it's hard to really break Salesforce, but it is easy to make little gotchas and little hiccups. So, as you're making changes, as you're executing stories, as you're thinking about a request that came in, one of the more common things that I see, this I'm pointing up here because I just had this conversation with somebody not too long ago, is we'll get a request perhaps to add a validation rule. This is a very standard request that, maybe comes in. Our business team has an issue that they're not getting data in the format that they want, or whatever their use case is. And so they've put this request in and says, I would like us to add a validation rule. And two things happen with a validation rule sometimes. And validation rules, of course, in Salesforce are relatively quick and easy. But number one, they have a potential to break test classes that that developers have built. So this is one that I had to make an agreement many, many years ago with my developer, where we committed that one of our working agreements was anytime we were going to put a validation rule in place, we would send that over to our dev team to essentially give us a heads up before, or a thumbs up before we would execute that. And then the other piece of that is there's already existing data in the system that potentially, is not going to meet the validation rule. Thus the reason they're putting it in, right? People have been putting bad data in, so they want to enforce it. So one of the things that I've seen admins do on more than one occasion is flip on that validation rule without recognizing that, now every time we try to go save all these existing records, somebody's not going to be able to do it. Right. So that's a really good example where even though the validation rule itself is easy, we've got to put a little bit of extra thought into it that says either we're going to maybe exclude records that were created before a certain date, or maybe we're going to go do some data cleanup, whatever it is, right? Again, there's not a right way to do it. It depends on the situation, but it simply means that we need to be aware that just because something seems easy, that there can be different implications. So what are the impacts? What might break? These are always great questions just to be thinking about for, every single change that you make. Who needs to know, right? Both from a technical perspective and a business perspective. How can we test it? I'd love to believe that we all work in an organization that has a huge team of, QA resources that can help us with every change. But the reality, at least in, most of the organizations that I've seen over the years, and I talk to a lot of Salesforce professionals, is we are our own QA teams, right? We QA each other's work. And so, just getting ourselves familiar with how can we test it? What could we be doing in our sandbox to make sure that we know this is working? And then my very favorite one, how can we monitor it? Right. So I'm a big believer in, sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes they go wrong because there's humans on the keyboard. Sometimes they go wrong because systems are systems and they just, have implications because there's a lot of things happening. Like that's okay. But we want to strive to be the one that's going to know when things go wrong. We want to the best of our ability, be able to be the first to spot it so that then we can communicate about it if we have to, but certainly fix it. And a very simple, easy thing that we can do a lot of times is simply build reports. Right? I call these our proactive monitoring dashboards. So our business users have dashboards that they use to maintain the health of their business. As admins, as Salesforce professionals, we should have a set of dashboards and reports that we use to be able to maintain and keep eyes on glass, as they say, the health of our Salesforce. And that could be data integrity. It could be, literally something if we just did some new automation, we're building reports to make sure that if that's a field that should always be populated under a certain condition, right? I can easily build a report that says, show me any records that had this that hit the business scenario, but still have a blank value. That's an easy breezy thing that I can do to just simply take a quick peek on that. I can put it on a dashboard that shows up in my inbox every morning, that lets me know if anything is out of whack. So again, those are some of the things that have saved me a lot of heartache over the years, is just taking time to consider the consequence and thinking, how would I know if something went wrong, right? A, what can I do to make sure that it's not going to? But B, if it did, how would I know? All right. Speaking of something going wrong, troubleshooting, I think, is very often kind of one of the things that newer admins end up doing. They're kind of taking those tickets, right? A lot of times that's a part of the role, or maybe on a client role where, or consulting role where, we get tickets and we need to go figure out what's going on. You are not always going to know the answer. Probably a lot of times you're not going to know the answer, especially in a new org. There's a lot in there. Sometimes, even if it's not a new org, and even if you're not new, like, this stuff sometimes can be hard to figure out. So I'm going to let you off the hook and say there's not an expectation that you automatically can go in and solve all of those things. But there is an expectation that you at least take the time to understand the question, that you're able to articulate it back. We always want to make sure it's not just a user error. So do you understand that you've got the we'll call them the resources that you would need to get assistance to solve this? So what record, under what circumstance, what specifically is the issue? Do we have screenshots, right? And that you've done enough initial investigation that when you raise your hand, which you absolutely can and should do, that you're not just saying, I can't fix this, and sending it over to somebody who's got to start from scratch, right? You essentially want to have the package that says, all right, here's the issue. I've validated it's an issue. Here's some resources we can look at, the screenshots, some particular records. Here's the things I've already tried because I assumed it might be this, this, or this, and none of those things have worked, right? That is a very reasonable and awesome way for you to facilitate getting that issue solved. And that is a very reasonable expectation that you might need help to do it. But that's always the one piece that I say. So you don't have to know the answer. Nobody expects you know all the answers. But if in fact that is part of your role, we do expect that you do the homework so that you can present that in a way that whoever's helping you can easily dive in and assist. All right. This is another one that I think will dramatically improve your learning curve. Share your screen, right? Just like I said, you're not going to want to do a teach back. I get it. In fact, even right now, you're like, she said that. I'm not going to do that. That sounds uncomfortable. This is going to be another one of those things. You're going to say, I don't want to share my screen. Somebody's going to realize that I don't exactly know where I'm clicking and I'm hesitating because I can't remember if I'm supposed to scroll here, 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 whatever it is. But here's the thing. When you let somebody share your screen, and if you're in person, that means that you come over and say, hey, watch me do this. If you work remotely or in different locations, it means literally like I'm doing right now, you say, let me share my screen and show you what I'm doing. You will learn so much faster. And the reason is there's a lot in there, right? And there are shortcuts and tricks, and there are ways that you can open multiple windows or drill into this flow thing faster. Like, people that have been doing this for a long time have figured out the tricks. They know how to quickly get from A to B. And they also know how to watch you do it and teach you some of those tricks. And those are the kind of things that, truth be told, we take for granted when we've been doing this for so long. So I don't even think to tell you that this is something that you need to pay attention to. But as soon as I watch you navigate around, it's like, oh, let me show you a trick. Oh, no wonder you can't find that. Let me show you this. So I promise you, if you are willing to share your screen and let people watch you work, you are going to get shortcuts that are going to save you so much time and make you better faster, which is really what this is all about. So please do that. All right. Ask for feedback and do it often, right? Some people are fortunate to have bosses and managers and clients that love to deliver feedback. But the truth of the matter is, most people don't. Like, that is just a fact. And most people, particularly, don't like to give negative feedback, right? That's not comfortable. And so, if you are starting a role and you're not getting any feedback, I want you to ask for it, right? You can ask for it as simple as, how am I doing? Based on, what just happened in that meeting, do you have any recommendations for ways I can be, things I can be doing better for, do you have any suggestions that would make me more effective based on what you've seen so far? I would love it if you could, let me know, how I could get better. Am I where you expected me to be at this point? Like, any of those questions, they don't have to be like big formal sit down sessions. I'd like some feedback, right? Like, that's not fun. But, ask those questions enough so your manager, your team, even I call them your constituents, whether that be your internal, your stakeholders, or your clients, so that they get comfortable and understand that you're somebody that wants to receive that feedback, because without knowing that, we can't get better. The last thing we want to know in 6 months is somebody was like, well, I think that you've not been doing this as well as you should have. Like, I want to know that as soon as I can, right? So that I can course correct, so that I can figure out exactly where I have opportunities for improvement, because we all do. We all do, but we want to hear specifically what those things are so that we can get better. All right. This is one that last year somebody I knew got their very first admin role. And so I was prepping for a call similar to this. And I said, it's one thing for me to give advice, but let me go talk to an admin who has just had his 6-month anniversary in his role. And I said, explain the presentation that I was giving that evening. And I said, what is the one piece of advice that you would give, having just finished 6 months in this job? And he thought about it. And this is directly from him. He said, trust that you know more than you think you do. And, you've spent a lot of time diving into Salesforce and learning Salesforce. And there's a reason that you got hired into this job, this hypothetical job that if you don't have yet, you will soon, right? And that's because you have learned a lot. Doesn't mean you know everything. We'll see in a minute that nobody will ever know everything, but you do know a lot. And I'm gonna also tell you that newcomers now have actually an advantage over kind of old, what we call more seasoned folks like myself, which is, you're coming in learning the latest and greatest, right? You are coming in, you're learning flow. You are coming in, you're learning lightning dynamic forms. You are coming in understanding the Salesforce world as it works today. And in many cases, you know more than people that have been working in Salesforce for a very long time in orgs that haven't yet caught up with all of those fancy features, all of those new things that have been introduced. And I kid you not, if anybody follows along and has watched any of the demo or demo jams that I've hosted, which is an opportunity for newcomers to create their own applications in a demo org and then demo it. What blows me away every time is they're using functionality that I have not even had a chance to get my hands on yet, right? Reactive elements and screen flows and just like all of this stuff that I literally at times have had to say, wait a minute, what are you showing me? I don't even know what that is. And I share that with you because that is what is going to happen when you go into a, a role, your first job, a new client, whatever it is. There are going to be things that you have more expertise in even than other people there. So I want to remind everybody to trust what you know, right? And again, there's more often than not lots of different ways to solve a problem on Salesforce. And the beauty of having a team is we all get to share our thoughts and some pros and some cons. And have you thought about that? And oh, interesting that you were going to approach it that way. I had a totally different approach. Those aren't wrong. Those are just different approaches. And that's how we deliver great Salesforce is when we bring those things to bear. And it's also how we learn from each other. I have been doing this for 22 years. I'm blown away by what I learned from my team, from those demo jams every day. I only know a little fraction of all there is to know. And so it is not, it is unlikely that there are people that know all the things that you have recently had an opportunity to learn. So, I always say, walk in with that Mick Jagger swagger, right? You know more than you think you do. Be confident in that. All right. The flip side of that is get comfortable that there will always be more to know. And it's what I just said. I've been doing this for 2 decades. I know a small fraction of all there is in Salesforce. All we can do is, you know, do the best we can to stay on top of the parts that we need to know our org. I always say, if you know the org, you know your business, and you know the art of the possible, you can always figure out how, right? We don't have to know all the things, but what we really need to do, it goes back to the very beginning, is make sure that we understand the business processes that we're supporting, the problems that we're solving, and then just the art of the possible on platform. We don't need to know all the click streams. And so, a piece of that guidance is don't feel like you need to go deep in the weeds and learn all the things. Figure out what things are relevant and stay high level until you have reason to dig in and do more. So with that, I said I was going to leave a lot of room for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if there's anything that people want to drill into.
Excellent session, by the way, Jodi. One thing that really jumped out at me was what do you expect from, asking people the question, what does it mean to them? I have been on the other side making documents, long-winded documents, and the customer is like, this is not what we wanted. So it would have saved me tons and tons of time. But I think when you're getting started, that bit comes up that if I ask this question, they might think I don't know enough to be here. But I think that's again very important question to ask. So I think there
Yeah,
were
and
so
it's
many
part of,
pointers I was
thank you for sharing that as an actual example. So I really appreciate that. And just again, for folks that might have missed it, the best recommendation that I have is to say, what does that mean to you? When you would like me to do documentation, what does that mean to you? Do you have any examples that I can look at so I can make sure we're aligned? And you could even say, because I've worked with lots of different clients and companies that have had a broad range of different details in their documentation. So thank you. That's a great validation point or proof point. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think just wanted to add one thing. The most key point, because having in a sales ecosystem for over kind of 7 years now, I think spend time with business is the most critical thing that you can do for whatever role you are doing. It's not about just the admin, developer, anything that you are doing. It's again giving the benefit to all the businesses as well. So that's the most, I think, the key point anyway for making sure that we're doing that.
I would agree, Sana. And I would also give the suggestion again, every role is different in terms of how they support you in doing that. And some people are going to have a business analyst maybe whose role has already been to document the business process. So, that's a great question to ask. Does any of that already exist? And if it doesn't, again, a way that you can add value from the get-go and make a big fan is to partner with somebody and say, hey, if you can, walk me through the process, or if I can get some time to sit with the business, how about if I put that on paper, what I learn? And again, it's a good opportunity for a teach back, right? How about if I put that on paper and do a knowledge share next week? And it might not be perfect yet, but we can use this as an opportunity as a team to make sure we're aligned and to solidify this documentation. So going forward, we'll have it. So thank you for that, Son. I think that's a really important point, that at the end of the day, we got to know what the process is, right?
Yeah. And you just actually remind me another thing of having that. Probably I was not doing it, even being a manager, and like I have a manager as well, the teach back. Probably, as you said, it sound silly, but I think that would be one thing that I'm taking away from this session, that I'll be start doing that one just to see how it goes. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. And I mean, I will tell you, everyone that's worked for me is going to be like, oh, I can't believe she made me do that. But I promise you, after the fact, they say that was the fastest way that I could get up to speed, because instead of just hearing words and thinking I knew them, I had to figure it out. And if you are a manager and you're asking your team to do that, the piece that I would, just encourage you to say is like, we're not scoring you on this, right? There's an expectation that it's going to be clunky, and there's going to be things that don't roll off the tongue, and there's going to be some things you get wrong. That's okay. That's what we'll work on going
Yeah,
forward, or that's where we'll know that there's still gaps. But it's a really good way to just accelerate that learning curve.
yeah, definitely. I'll be quiet and passing it to the audience now. So yeah, thank you for that. What do you
I
could.
think Moham has a question. Moham, go on.
Hello, Jodi, Maham. And
Uh-huh.
one question: whenever you're working as in any role, you're admin, you're BA, you are an architect, or whatever, till what extent? I hear some frustrations when customers, as you said, that you need to understand the business, and then when everything is sort of penned down, the requirements start getting changed. So it's sort of my question is majority of my question is related to change management. Like when such thing happens, what is your best way? I mean, normally such situations could make anyone frustrated. Like, we talked about it. We penned it down, right? This is exactly what you said. Or should I just like handicap you next time? Or what next should be the step? But ultimately, we have to deal that professionally. So just want to know your take, that how you can control your emotions at that time and not to punch the person right in the face. That is very humble.
Don't punch your client, people.
But
Doesn't mean I haven't wanted to a few times, right? So here's what I would say. I think, generally speaking, I would try to figure out what's the root cause of the
Mhm.
change.
Yeah.
And in my experience, there's probably a couple of reasons, but there's two different things I would say more often than not is the case. One is we're building requirements on a process that's not fully baked. And so that sometimes is an issue, that somebody is thought they knew, we did these requirements, and then they come back and they're like, oh, we changed our mind. So that sometimes is on us to say, are we sure that the business process doesn't mean that how they were going to execute it had to be fully baked, because that's part of our job, but
Yeah.
the actual high level business process. So that's part of it. In which case, if I'm the one that started putting something on paper, or certainly doing something hands on keyboards, when in retrospect I realized that that probably wasn't fully baked yet, part of the way
Mhm.
that I can restrain from the punch, right, is say like, okay, that might have been on me. The other piece, which I think is most often what I see when there's a lot of change, is that we haven't demoed early and often enough. And
Mhm.
the truth of the matter is, especially people new to Salesforce, especially if it's a new process, a lot of times people don't understand exactly what we're talking about or what they're going to get or how it's going to work.
Yeah.
And so, it's not that they're changing their mind, it's that they're going, oh, okay, now that I see this, right? And sometimes they have some different ideas. I'll give you an example. So I recently, I'm working on an audio series that's going to go live next month, and I hired a designer to help me create a workbook that I'm going to
Hmm.
provide with the audio series. And I've never created a workbook before. Like, I don't know. I don't even know what's in there. And so I gave this designer my requirements, right? I was
Hmm.
pretty sure like this is what I wanted. And then I got the first draft and I was like, oh, like, okay. Now that I'm seeing this, I don't want that included.
Yeah.
And and so I was that client that kept changing my mind. And it was because we were still actually iterating, and I needed that. So part of my guidance always is we have to find the smallest incremental things that we can demo and have those checkpoints, right? So like before we build out an entire data model in all the fields, here's a quick prototype of what I'm thinking about. Is this in line with what you were expecting? Now that you see this, is there anything you might do different, right? And we have to figure out ways to kind of build those checkpoints as off, and they don't have to be like extending our timeline, because they can just be quick. I can do a 15-minute meeting with my client every morning for 3 days where we're just showing a little bit incrementally more. And in my experience, when we bring them along for the ride like that, like they might change their mind along the way,
Hmm.
but we're not going to get those last minute changes.
Yeah.
um, and then the
Something
other
really
piece.
funny actually happened with one of my customers. We made their product live, and they said that it was a marketing cloud instance, Jody. And he said that the initial configurations have been made in terms of the marketing cloud. And then and my whole team was on Eid holidays. And he said that the newsletters are not going to my customers. And I was like, all right, we'll figure it out. No problem. Then at that point of time, I got to know that in the initial configuration, his ex consultant didn't actually set the sender domains. There was no valid sender domain. So ultimately, it was all blacklisted and the emails just stopped happening. Just stopped, they're just reaching to their customers. So I think in this sort of a situation, when you're being told a thing, so I think as you said, the checklist, no matter like from which instance or at which point you're going to pick the project, it's like there needs to be a checklist that you have to maintain, and sometimes to trust your client and sometimes never to trust your client and trust yourself to see that all right, what they're telling you is there already or not. And I guess that's a great point that you have raised. And I'm not going to punch now, at least. I didn't already, but more encouragement not to do it. Thank you very
Also,
much.
a punching bag in the corner of your office is never a bad idea.
Idea, yes.
Thank you, Maham. Excellent question. And we're just enjoying the punching bit. Because deep down, everybody had that moment at least once. But we're not
True,
endorsing
true
punching at all.
confessions. That's right. That's right.
We had a question from Sundas, and it was regarding the point that you mentioned, Jody, withholding the judgment. And Sundas is asking, is it more effective to share feedback and suggestion when you notice something, and you outline how the person can improve it, or should we wait for a better, like a good moment to provide
Yeah.
input?
I mean, there's never a perfect answer, right? The answer, like all things Salesforce, is going to be it depends. Specifically, that withholding judgment had to do with when you first come into an org, right? There's a lot of times there's reasons things are, a lot of times people are aware of what those issues are. There might be a backlog that's already addressing those things. Or it could be that your boss is the one that built it. You think it's crazy, but your boss is the one that built it. So the reason I say withhold judgment is sometimes, walking in for the first time, the problems that you end up recognizing to be the things that need to be solved are probably going to be some different than some of those first things that you saw. But the reason I say write it down is you might have some very valuable ideas. You just want to make sure as you're net new inside a role that we're not coming in kind of, with guns blazing, if you will, with all of these ideas that, maybe there's a reason things are what they are. But as you go forward, once you have that context, certainly it, part of the value add that we provide in our roles and with our clients is finding those things that have room for opportunity where we might be able to do it better. So, it wasn't to suggest that we should never bring ideas forward. It was really more to say, getting started, whether it's a new client or a new role, we just want to make sure we know the lay of the land a little bit before we have too much to say, if you will. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. And I'm sure so this answers your question. And since Jody, you mentioned that you have hired and trained multiple admins and consultants as well. We have a question around the interview tips, but I would just like to add a little bit more context to it. So we have people who have done all the badges on Trailhead. They have, created a demo org as well, but now they are just waiting to go for the interviews. They might be thinking, what more they need to learn. But as you said, there is just no end to what you can learn on Salesforce. So what would be your tip for, encouraging them to just go for the interviews and how they can make sure that they, you know, um, take their best foot forward? And
Yeah. So you already said the magic word, which if anybody spent any time with me, my first piece of advice is going to be you got to get hands on keyboards and build out the demo org and have something available to show. If folks, there you go. I was going to say you can go to this page right here. You can watch the demo or demo jams, the replays. They're all available on that company page on LinkedIn. And I always say it doesn't have to be perfect, right? The goal is if we have an interview tomorrow, we want something to show. And the benefit of that is it starts also giving us something to talk about if we don't have the actual experience. So somebody could ask about, tell me about, have you ever seen something like this, some kind of a feature they're asking about or some kind of a business problem. We can say, well, I haven't done that exactly, but I would probably approach it the same way I did when I did XYZ in my demo org. Would you like to see it? Right? It starts giving us an opportunity to kind of show off some of our skills. And ultimately, what we want to do to the extent we can is be as, to get somebody to be willing to take a look inside our demo org. By the way, it's not easy. They're not always going to say yes on the first try. So we might try it a couple different ways, but there really is, and again, if you've watched any of these jams, there's a big difference inside an interview once somebody actually gets to see your work. I always say it changes the tone and tenor, and suddenly they're talking to you like a colleague. And more often than not, you've got something that they haven't seen before, and now you're swapping tips and tricks, and it really can change the format of an interview. So that's really one. The other is making sure that you are focused on learning about the company, right? That we can't know all things Salesforce, but we at least can have a sense. You can now use Chat GPT and get some examples of what an organization like this industry, what are some different use cases that they might have for their Salesforce implementation, so you can at least get some information. And then as well, listen, questions are a superpower, not just once you have the role. They're also a superpower inside the interview itself, but we want them to be smart questions, right? So this is where we really want them to be questions that are showing your understanding of, tell me about your org and how is it supported, and what is some of the business problems you're solving, and what are some of the challenges that you expect that you're going to be working on in the next 6 months, and really showing that you have an understanding of how Salesforce is set up. I see Mauricio on camera, so I'm talking quick because I'm guessing you might have a question.
Yes, hi, Jodi. Nice to see you
Hi.
again. Yeah, cool. With every release, the Salesforce is doing, the admins is getting more power and power and power. And within this context, what your advice for the new admins, right? Because before, a good time ago, you just used to play a role to just take actions with the users, report dashboards, simple stuff. But now with all the release that's happened, the admins receive a lot of power, things to doing Salesforce? What kind of device you provide for the people? Because the learning every time increase, and sometimes, at least here in Brazil, sometimes that means they say, okay, we get stuck because before we think that we're gonna do this, and now is we need to do this plus three things more, right? What kind of device do you provide to the new admins?
Yeah. I mean, there is no doubt that, the role of admin and just the Salesforce platform itself is significantly more complex than it used to be. I mean, that is a true statement. And I think, it's important that we all recognize that as we're talking about bringing people into the ecosystem. I also believe, though, that that is why we're starting to see different roles, right? So 3 years ago, there was probably, very few people that had the role of Salesforce BA or Salesforce product owner. It was admins that were doing what I call both the front of the house work, which is when you're doing, the business requirements and working with users, and they were doing the back of the house work, actually doing the execution, hands on keyboards, releases, deploys. And that used to be a reasonable and feasible expectation. And increasingly, that's not true anymore, especially as just a lot of the core admin functions like automation, declarative automation now with Flow actually warrants some level of understanding of programmatic concepts. So the fact that somebody would be able to go deep in Flow and also be an expert in RevOps, for instance, is just not as realistic as it used to be. And so as we're seeing in real time these new roles come into being, and there's now, it's starting to be more and more common that there's a BA or a product owner. I think the good news is over time, people are going to be able to decide if one of those paths is better instead of needing to be good at all of it, right? We're going to start recognizing that my strength might be front of the house and I still need to know a lot about Salesforce, but maybe my expertise is going to be in the art of asking and documenting and uncovering business problems versus people that really want to go deep on the back of the house. Maybe, guess what? Maybe you don't have to know all those things and be comfortable giving presentations to C-levels anymore, right? So I think that's the good news. I think the challenge right now is roles are all over the board. I did a poll last year. It was very unscientific, but I think I had like 300 people respond more or less on LinkedIn. Their title was Salesforce Business Analyst. Are you doing hands-on keyboards work? And over 50% of them were. And I think that's because it's a new role inside a lot of companies. I think they're moving admins into that role who still know how to do things. I think over time, we're going to start seeing the roles look more like traditional software development roles, right? Product people aren't doing hands-on keyboards. Business analysts aren't doing hands-on keyboards. Doesn't mean they don't need to be experts in Salesforce. So I think the challenge, Mauricio, to answer the question is we have to make sure that when we're going into those kind of interviews that we're really asking the questions to make sure that we understand what the role is. By the way, a lot of companies are still just cutting and pasting business job descriptions. But when you actually ask the questions and say, is this role reporting into a functional unit or is this role part of the technology team? Can you define, the percent of time that I would be doing on these kinds of things versus those kinds of things? I'll share it with this, maybe with the leaders, you can send it out. I just this weekend posted on LinkedIn something that I called the Salesforce, what do I call it? Spectrum of responsibility, or something along those lines. And it really is the spectrum that shows all of these different things that are part and parcel of maintaining the system. And I think, part of it is making sure that we understand which of these we do or would like to do if we haven't done them yet. And then that's part of the conversation that we need to have to make sure that the roles that we're taking are actually aligned with our understanding and vice versa. And I think it's a challenge in the ecosystem. I think it's a challenge with clients right now. These are, these are changes that are happening very fast. And some of the language of how we talk about different roles hasn't caught up yet. And just my final point on this is 3 years ago, if somebody would have said, hey, I'm an admin, should I learn developer thing. Should I take my PD1? And I would have said, only if you think you want to go in that direction. It's probably important to understand art of the possible, probably important to understand, what's happening in a trigger. Today, I would say, yeah, I think, we're seeing more and more of this kind of admin developer, is that how we pronounce it? That unless you think you're going to take more of a front of the house role, like it's starting to be a fact that we do need to understand some programmatic concepts. And again, 2 years ago, I would have given very different advice around that. So, this is changing in real time. I think the good news is it's an exciting time to be in the ecosystem. And I think even though it feels like a lot right now, I do feel like it's ultimately going to land in some specialization. So we all don't have to span that whole spectrum. Like I say, from RevOps to DevOps, that's a really long road. I don't know. Did
Thank
that
you.
help, Mauricio?
Of course, always.
All
Thank you very
right.
much.
Thank you, Mauricio, for joining and asking the question. And you're just nailing, kicking every question out of the park, Jodi. I love all the answers. I've shared the scope of responsibility spectrum that you talked about, and also your 20 must ask questions.
Oh,
I'm definitely
fantastic.
grabbing
Thank
that
you.
after the session and have a look at that. And I really wanted to feature the demo jam because I have had the opportunity to attend one, and I was absolutely blown away by the solutions. And I've been doing Salesforce for 7 years, and I'm like, I have never thought of doing this. It was that awesome.
And that's exactly my point when I said newcomers have advantage right now, that they're learning things that a lot of the rest of us have not had a chance to use yet, right? We're busy running, orgs that have been around for a while. We don't even know what some of this stuff is yet. And newcomers are having an opportunity to put hands on keyboard and explore that and play with it. And that's a huge value that you can bring to the table. So remember that slide that says you know more than you think you do. Those are some really good examples. And thank you for highlighting the demo jam, because there's been some amazing work done by supposed newbies, right? That's what I always say. Like, we'll rethink what it means to be a newcomer when you see what kind of work they're delivering.
And how you moderate those sessions, and how you engage with people, how you motivate them, is also a pretty big game changer for them. So I think you are doing an absolute, God's work with motivating all of those people, and that's why they're there with their solutions and feeling confident and comfortable for sharing that. So thank you for creating this space for everybody.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And again, my only reminder on that is, if you go out and watch those, I don't want you to be intimidated and feel like you're not ready to have your own demo org, right? You start where you are. And even if it's simply that you're going to be able to show that you understand how to make, some basic formula fields and do a couple things with, conditional page layouts, if that's where you are, you start there and then we iterate. I don't want anyone ever to see all of those really knocked out demo jam orgs and think that that means that they shouldn't start. You're ready right now. If you're here today, you're ready. So if you're looking for a role, let's get that demo org built wherever you are.
Awesome. I wish I had those things on that people have to share their teams on because I'm feeling so excited every time you answer a question. I think that brings us to the end of the questions. Thank you, Jody, for spending more than an hour with us on a Friday night. Before you go, we have just a little bit of swag to give away. So everybody who joins the sessions automatically gets added to the giveaway. We ran the wheel in the back end while you were answering the questions, and we also already have a winner with us. So before taking more time, Sundar, thank you for joining us, asking questions and engaging, and we will get your swag delivered to you in a few days. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Jody. We would love to have you back whenever you have the time. And I will make sure I'll share all the resources that you talked about in an email after the event to all the attendees.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And again, I know it's late where you are, so I appreciate everybody being willing to stay up and participate, and excellent questions. And yeah, thank you. I would love to come back. And by the way, everybody, I'm very active on LinkedIn. If you're listening to this, shoot me a note, shoot me a DM, let me know where you are in your journey. Let me know if there's a topic that you've got on your mind that I can cover, and know that there's lots of people rooting for you.
Thank you, Jodi. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Maham, Mauricio, and Sahid, everybody else for joining us. Thank you, Nahar.
Thank you,
Thanks
everyone.
Thank
all.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.
you. Bye.